Thank you very much, Blair, for that introduction. Also, thank you very much, City of Melbourne and Knowledge team for having me. Welcome, everyone. And first of all, I do absolutely hope that everyone's doing well. This is obviously a bit of a unique situation. Picture me talking to my camera with, last time I checked, hundreds of people that had subscribed to this event, yet there is not a single face in front of me. So yeah, definitely a unique situation. Before we start, I'd like to say that on behalf of the City of Melbourne, the University of Melbourne and Science Gallery Melbourne, I acknowledge the traditional owners of the Kulin Nation, on whose lands I am fortunate enough to live, work and learn on. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. And as I said, we certainly live in unique times. We're all digitally connected, but we're physically dispersed. And as such, I'd like to extend my respect to the traditional owners of the lands that each and every one of you may live, learn, and work on as well. For those of you that don't know me, perhaps a brief personal introduction. I've got a very strong interest in social qualities of technology, and predominantly those technologies that define how we live our lives. And as I guess you're all aware, these technologies start to define more and more how we live our lives today. I'm intrigued by how technology increasingly convinces us to sacrifice, I guess, personal privacy in favor of little bits of convenience, or at least that's how these technologies are often sold to us. And very often I find myself unpack technologies that bring humanity more darkness than enlightenment, unfortunately. In this realm, I feel very fortunate to work across IT and the arts, both at the University of Melbourne's School of Computing and Information Systems, as well as Science Gallery Melbourne. I've got the opportunity to work with stellar teams, and I've uncovered also personally this fantastic opportunity for arts and science in tandem to help us unpack these social qualities of technology that I'll talk about. And I guess this combination of arts and science, it really helps me understand how members of society think about technology and how we can use these insights to help ensure that technology is here to help us progress and connect rather than grind to a halt. Today, as you're all aware, it's the 14th of May, and I did a bit of Googling, as you do, what happened in the past on the 14th of May in the tech and surveillance space and social credit space. Surprisingly, not a lot happened, even though you might be interested that on the 11th of May, I think it was 1987, that one of the biggest AI developments was introduced, and Garry Kasparov was beat by an AI in chess. But last year on this date, the world was definitely a different place. I guess we can all agree on that. In the absence of the pandemic, San Francisco banned police use of facial recognition technology. And on exactly the same day, the Canadian government as well established its advisory council on AI, so the ethical use of AI. Today, unfortunately, in more ways than one, the world is very, very different from the place it was last year. Technology seems, and I guess is, more important than ever before. Ultimately, we're all here, connected through technology, and it helps us get on with our personal and professional lives as we go through lockdown. But with that also comes a risk. There's a significant risk of adopting technologies that are not here to benefit us. Our increased reliance on social media is definitely one of those risks. And another one is a development we've been witnessing for the past few years in China, its social credit system, with 2020 set to be the year where the system actually goes live nationwide to affect each citizen. In this talk, I'll look at this development. I'll look at how it came about. I'll unpack it and also study and talk with you about the effects it is starting to have on our Western society. But we'll also formulate an outlook onto our future in Western society. I think the title of this talk says it all. Social credit is here, because indeed, even though social credit may be something we think is impossible to one day influence our lives here, this future may actually be a lot closer than you think. Now, let's start off with an example from popular culture. And this is a first for me. I'm going to screen share my screen, obviously, in this Zoom talk. So we'll see how that all goes. So this was an extract from Black Mirror's episode Nosedive. I think it was the first episode of the third season back in 2016. And that entire season, and particularly this episode, was developed and created really mostly in response to our use, and as I said before, probably our overuse and over-reliance on social media. The episode kind of helps us speculate about a future where this single dreaded number controls our position in society and our access to services and goods. And you may think this is just another American television show. And to a certain degree, obviously it is. It's quite dramatized. But at the same time, it probably is not just an American television show. Because more and more, it is becoming a reality for many billions of people. Now, if you've just tuned in to this webinar, you're watching this month's Melbourne Conversations event from the city of Melbourne. My name is Niels Wouters, and I'm talking about social credit systems and how they're increasingly entering our worlds as well. If you have any questions for me, you can drop those in the comments on Facebook or send an email to conversations@melbourne.gov.au. And we've just set the scene for this talk by exploring how popular media has made us aware of the concerns that social credit brings with it. Now, let's unpack this a little bit further. And here I go again, sharing my screen with you. Social credit is a sort of reputation scheme for individuals, for corporates, and for not-for-profit entities, and for government services as well. The scheme quantifies past actions in an attempt to describe one's value in public, economic, cultural life by way of a numerical score. And look, we all do this. In the back of our minds, and probably without necessarily having a digit attached to it, we still have assigned a score to, say, President Donald Trump, and we might have assigned a score to the Victorian Chief Health Officer, Brett Sutton. And we may even compare these scores to each other and find out that we wouldn't mind having one of them over for dinner, but we would actually mind having the other person over for dinner. Now, I definitely know who I would like to have over for dinner. Similar things happen for icons in popular culture. Think Kylie Minogue versus Madonna. And we also even do it with our own friends. And that's, I guess, a sort of baseline comparison with a Chinese social credit system. But unlike Western credit systems, such as Equifax, that I guess most of us will be comfortable and familiar with, this is no pure credit worthiness assessment. The Chinese system aims to assess your worthiness in society. So in fact, we're not really talking about a social credit system, but we're rather talking about a social integrity system. It consists of, first of all, technology to monitor citizens, us as individuals. Two, it consists of algorithms to rate behaviors and actions, which then ultimately feeds into the third aspect of the whole system, a sort of web, a maze of regulatory practices and frameworks. And while all of that may sound fine, because I guess who of us wouldn't want a better society, a safer society, a society that performs, I guess, better and is more comfortable to live in. Obviously, there are quite a few concerns with this sort of approach. First, there is a significant approach in terms of access and civil liberties. This is a quote from Joe Tsai, Alibaba's executive vice chairman in 2018. For those of you who are not aware of what Alibaba is very often compared to what we know as Amazon in the Western world, so a large online retailer. So he said back in 2018, we want people to be aware of the causal link between their behavioral choices and the real world products and services that are made available to them, so they know to behave themselves better, end quote. For that, and in order to accomplish that kind of thing, where you can, I guess, understand, or for people to understand better what they are doing and for that to influence their life choices, for that, you need to link up all of the data sources you have available on people. And that's exactly what is currently happening. So there's really a concern when these ratings are used to control access to goods and services, or in fact, your participation in public life. because positive behavior is promoted through incentive schemes, such as by providing access to rewards and specific privileges, such as discounts on hotels, rental cars, cheaper mortgage rates, school admission and scholarships, and so on. Let me show you this slide as well. So the opposite is also true. Transgress established norms prescribed by, I don't know, someone. And the nominally private electronic funds transfer platform, for instance, won't let you pay for the groceries or the babysitter or the water bill, and your rideshare service may not show up at your door. As the example illustrates, low social credit scores will ultimately prevent people from accessing essential life services. They'll be barred entirely from rewards and privileges that others are actually granted. Not true, you may think, or just like a script for a sci-fi movie. Unfortunately, it is true. Today, more than 18 million people in China have been banned from flying, and 5.5 million people are currently unable to purchase high-speed rail tickets. And what's perhaps even more surprising, at least to me, is that the government shares this information publicly. So the video that you're currently watching, the scrolling list of lines, I guess, names and people, is indeed a publicly available resource where you can check who is restricted from train travel, from plane travel, and what their national ID numbers are. Let me also read you this little extract that I found out yesterday from Adam Greenfield's essay on social credit. And he calls this sincerity systems, which I kind of like. So he says, at entry into the register, one's score starts at a nominal 1,000 social credit points, which is then subsequently incremented or decremented in response to one's actions in the world, whether public or private, online or offline. Remember to take the recycling out in time for pickup Wednesday morning and enjoy a modest bump in your score. Usually you get extra 5 points. Keep it above 750 and you may even be whisked through airport security without having to suffer the indignity of a body scan. Run a red light though, or get into a shouting match with your neighbor, or spend too much time playing games online even, and you'll see your score suffer. Allow it to fall too far beneath the critical threshold, usually the score of 600, that defines the upper bound of the officially suspect Class D, and you may be barred from the national high-speed rail network or find it difficult to purchase airline tickets. Your children may even have trouble being accepted to good schools. Your home internet service may be restricted to dial-up speeds, and ultimately, you may be denied access to public housing entirely. For those of you that have just tuned in, you're watching this month's Melbourne Conversations event from the city of Melbourne. My name is Niels Wouters, and I'm talking about social credit systems. Now, please make sure to drop your comments and questions on Facebook or send an email to conversations@melbourne.vic.gov.au. The second concern with social credit systems is that as they increasingly, I guess, permeate into the digital sphere, the metrics they leverage consist no longer of mere crowdsourced data, but also data that is automatically analyzed from state-operated surveillance systems. And this is obviously concerning because with state-operated infrastructure and state-owned data, all citizens become at risk of being approached and being dealt with as if they were criminals. As a state attempts to preventatively categorize people based on ambiguous criteria and use this to avoid for them to commit any offense. The challenge also with reward systems such as these is that even though they are promised to benefit those that excel, those that perform well within, I guess, an ambiguous set of standards, in fact, they often achieve the exact opposite. They oppress any behavior that does not fit and sanction those that exhibit these behaviors. Probably you're right if you're a commercial partner, say Alibaba, say Amazon, but challenging once politics become involved. And as standards for punishment or reward are ambiguous, so are the pathways to raise concerns and complaints and undo false positives. And these become particular concerns in countries where, I guess many technology and IT companies are owned or part owned by the state. Which really brings us to the third challenge. What we see is that social credit increasingly leverages data collected through online platforms. For instance, social media, banking, e-commerce, and yes, even the surveillance infrastructure that is present in private residences. And I've flagged this numerous times before. Smart speakers are able and are trained to spot particular keywords in anything you say. Webcams and smartphones that we carry with us do exactly the same thing. Let me talk about one particular example. A Chinese company called iFlyTech is a partially state-owned IT company and is also working on a national speech pattern and voice database. A national voice database, can you imagine? It also creates voice recognition software and smart speakers. In the province of Anhui, their technology now scans all telephone calls in real time. Their technology is also alleged to be used for human rights abuses in Xinjiang. China Unicom's president, I'm sorry, I think I have to share my screen with you. China Unicom's president said back in 2016 that, quote, in the future, we'll have a central big data platform, all information about customers in one central, easy to access place, end quote. Now, think about that for a moment. Really, all data from your financial information to your use of social media, consumption patterns, travel details, tax, court records, all of that in one single central place. Now, it doesn't mean that a government social credit system will do so out of the box, but we can expect that, I guess, yeah, government officials are certainly taking cues from what private companies mention and the sort of projects and algorithms that they develop themselves. This is obviously of particular concern as private partners have been licensed to develop and trial social credit pilot programs in various cities. Many of these players are actually also active in the West. There's the case of Tencent, for instance, which we know from applications such as WeChat, and very recently having bought a stake in Afterpay. There's also Alipay, which is the financial branch of Alibaba, which I mentioned before. And ultimately, there's Hikvision, which many of you might not know, but is actually one of the major, I guess, manufacturers of surveillance cameras and very active in Australia at the moment as well. And yeah, really surprising, because we thought that Facebook tracking our behaviors was quite scary. And we'll come back to this later. Now, there's a fourth concern, and that's the use of real-time facial recognition, body scanning, and location tracking. And good old facial recognition, because that's absolutely opening an entirely new can of worms, because we all love Snapchat, TikTok, Face Swap, and other apps that enable us to, I guess, yeah, virtually modify our faces and even our entire bodies if we want to. But in the realm of surveillance, owners and operators are now able to identify people in camera footage. You, for instance, walking through the city, your name might be attached to this little blob on camera footage. And they might be able to use clever machine learning algorithms to detect what exactly you are doing, how you are behaving, and even with whom you're hanging out in the middle of the city. Even though computer scientists and I guess IT wizards may show off how accurate and how reliable their machine learning model is, given a fairly set of reference samples, the unfortunate reality is that we're often only automating old-fashioned and concerning human classification and categorization techniques. Think eugenics, social Darwinism, or this guy behind me, phrenology. Our research group set out a while ago to not so much evaluate the effectiveness of facial recognition, but better understand whether we, as members of society, understand that this is possible. And whether we, I guess, also understand that this is likely to one day affect us all. The Interaction Design Lab, together with artist Lucy McRae and Science Gallery Melbourne, developed a speculative environment that uses a real and, in fact, not so inaccurate machine learning model to analyze one's face and describe one's personality. Let me show you what we developed exactly.
think it's pretty safe to say that most of us are obsessed with our smartphones, and applications like this one, Snapchat, make use of artificial intelligence to firstly recognise my face and then allow me to apply filters and funny effects to my image. Today, I'm outside the State Library in Victoria to experience another form of AI technology over here. This one is promising to give me the perfect face.
Hi.
Hello.
Welcome to the Perfection Salon. My name is Lucy. I'm going to be your guide. The point of the biometric mirror is to have a discussion in a public arena about the implications artificial intelligence may have on our future, on culture, on beauty ideals.
Here's where the magic happens.
The first part of the treatment is to psychoanalyze the client through facial recognition, so we can tell you your age, your gender, how weird you are, how responsible you are, and then secondly, through another facial recognition photograph, merge your face into what is considered symmetrically perfect.
Now, it's easy to laugh at the results or shrug them off as just a bit of fun, but there's more to it than that.
So one of the reasons it's important to teach people about the limitations of artificial intelligence and these kinds of analyses is because people might assume that because it's done by a computer, it's objective and correct. And what they might not realize is actually an application like Biometric Mirror draws on a data set of faces that have been rated by people. And so those ratings contain human biases. And so one example in the dataset of Biometric Mirror is that anybody with a beard is classified as aggressive. So of course I am classified as an aggressive person by Biometric Mirror, even though I don't think I am. I hope I'm not.
This is my colleague Ryan. He's definitely not aggressive at all. Now with Biometric Mirror, this is obviously not the algorithm in use by any government that is implementing a social credit system. Or at least I would have hoped so until quite soon after the launch, quite a while ago, we started receiving expression of interest from industry to discuss with us whether the tech could actually be integrated in their products. Anyway, that's food for another discussion. What we can do, however, is we can use this work as a sort of opportunity for us to reflect upon the state of affairs in the Western world. Are we evolving towards social credit systems as well? Or perhaps are they here already? And what we must flag is that a social credit system like I described above seems fairly easy to implement in nations that turn towards ubiquitous digital mediation. Everyday Chinese life is already governed by networked digital technology, and it's really impressive to see. In the West, we're probably not there yet. Sure, I mean, you might already have liked or disliked the video of this very talk, but that's unlikely to affect my social standing. At worst, I guess I might lose some sleep over it. But we may not be too far off a future where social credit actually integrates in our culture. We, in the Western world, we've got this sort of tendency to depict the social credit system as draconian, authoritarian, and Orwellian. And I guess it may very well be the case, but the simple fact that it builds upon the traditional Western notion of the financial credit score is actually a first indication that we ourselves are not in a not too dissimilar space. We all have scores and credit scores and ratings here, and they affect our access to a wide range of financial services in most cases. But there's more, and I guess for the purpose of this talk, I've surveyed apps on my phone that assign a numerical rating to the account I have with them or with the provider. It probably doesn't get a lot more dystopian than the app that I have that gives me points for a night of uninterrupted sleep. And to be honest with you, with a baby in our house, you can imagine that I hold on for dear life to every single point I gain there. But there's a handful of other apps that I have on my phone. Qantas, for instance, they give me points for flying. It's actually also the app that gives me points for sleeping. It gives me points for purchasing particular goods and services. There's the obvious example, Uber. You might not get to see the points yourself clearly as we launch the app, but obviously we've all been asked to rate our drivers, and similarly drivers rate us. There's Airbnb. We get reviews when we leave a rental property. or we give reviews to people renting a property from us. There's ways even. We get assigned a score that kind of depends on how many kilometers we drive every month or every week. And there's Fitbit. Again, we get points for the workouts that we do. Surprisingly, even my email client seems like a mini social credit system in itself, though one, I guess, where the incrementing number stands for a decrementing credit. Sorry to all those of you whose email replies are long overdue. And I guess obviously there's the beloved social networks that I haven't even mentioned yet. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, where we constantly fight to achieve a certain number of likes, mentions, comments, and yeah, so much more. And in a way, it's extremely ironic that today this talk is actually streamed via Facebook. Indeed, a social network that has sparked significant controversy in recent years. Not only because of the Cambridge Analytica scandal that I guess most of us are very well aware of, but probably also because it is known that the network assigns a trustworthiness rating to each and every one of us. Details about it are very vague. It's definitely not something that Facebook publishes about very openly and shares with developers, for instance. The extent of its usage is also quite unknown, but it's another sort of ambiguous rating that is influenced by algorithms that analyze how our networks of friends and colleagues interact with our messages. Now, similar to the Chinese social credit system, none of these apps, Uber, Yelp, Twitter, Facebook, Airbnb, none of them work together to form sort of monolithic data repositories that describe our social transgressions in public, private, digital, and analog space. The nice thing, or the good thing, and the benefit I think that we have is that each of these networks and apps, they live in their own particular sort of bubble, with very few of them actually sharing the data and ratings across apps. But then one remark that I do want to make there as well is that we're being offered increasingly the convenience to sign in to new apps and networks by using the social accounts that we already have. We can log into Uber with our Facebook account. We can log into Airbnb with our Facebook account. That's where it gets quite interesting, because then all of a sudden, all of these ratings do stay quite well connected to this single, say, Facebook account, for instance. But the good thing, and I think the strength of us in a Western democracy, is also that none of these networks and apps would give authorities insight into the ratings and other data points that they, or that we produce and that they collect. At least they wouldn't do that without a warrant in place. But I also think that we are at a really interesting time for quite a couple of reasons again. First, we all increasingly opt in to apps and services that rate our behaviors. We love the numbers, right? As they introduce a fun element of gamification, as we try to impress our networks of friends, colleagues, and perhaps more worryingly, it's also this element of gamification as we try to impress ourselves and nurture, in a way, the narcissistic tendencies that we all have. But in doing so, we also enable IT companies and multinationals to unscrupulously scrape the data we produce in an attempt to better understand who we are and how we think. And as our timelines on networks such as Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and others become filled with content sourced via intelligent algorithms, or as we gain access to a highly coveted service, we're all increasingly harmonized, socially controlled. And as a result of that, some of us, even in the Western world, struggle to secure a holiday rental, for instance, due to this one negative Airbnb review. Or we can't secure a timely Uber ride for a similar reason, perhaps just because we didn't feel like talking to our driver one day. Or we struggle to book a table at a restaurant because we've arrived late once or twice, and I guess you can always blame the baby for that. And yes, we may be ineligible for a flight upgrade simply because we're in the wrong tier. We don't have enough points. All of these systems form part of our everyday lives, and in a very surprising way, I feel that we no longer question them. A second concern is that, as I said in the beginning of this talk, the world is in a very unique state at the moment, a very unique condition. I think as the pandemic continues to create carnage and uncertainty about the future, we're also at risk of adopting, even more so than ever before, I think, technologies that are portrayed as the sort of sole solution to pandemic-proof our lives, whatever that means. There is a distinct warming up to humanless, contactless technology. Contactless payments, drones that, I guess, deliver goods, but also detect raised temperatures, teachers and medical professionals being replaced by Zoom, Skype and bots, and much more. I think we're seeing a lot of beautiful innovation lately, but we're also seeing a lot of innovation that I think we all should question and definitely ask this question: is this really something we want moving forward? We're currently at risk of giving the tech companies even more power than before, helping them to ultimately supplant governments. We're at risk of no longer putting the necessary checks and balances in place that ensure new technologies and developments are safe, democratic, ethical, beneficial, and perhaps most important, I think, are simply built, developed, and thought through based on, the simple idea of common sense. I'll share my screen again with you guys. Now, as a demonstration of where this can lead to, I invite you all to see for yourself how a system that does not have these necessary checks and balances in place, how that can cause chaos. For the purpose of this talk, if you browse to biometricmirror.com, ideally, I'd say on a laptop or desktop PC, don't leave the live stream from your mobile device, let's say. You can experience for yourself what one such dark reality may look like or lead to. This link and the application will remain active for the next hour after this talk. Unfortunately, for those of us watching the video on catch-up, you'll have to wait until the next event for a biometric mirror scan. As a closing note, I think the message of my talk is quite clear. I'd like to remind ourselves that the Western democracies we're in, they grant us freedom to opt into technologies that rate and quantify our behaviors. Governments here do not seem to be overly eager to roll out nationwide social credit systems, and that's good. But we should remain very focused on IT companies that, through clever investment strategies, have increasing stakes in all aspects of our lives, from financial services to groceries, healthcare, you name it. Even cars that detect our voice and analyze how we drive. As all of these services, I think we all agree that they're very essential for so much in our lives, and perhaps today even more so than ever before. I think we really need to ask the question whether we want commercial partners like Google, Amazon, Apple, Tencent, whether we really want to provide them with our data and whether we really want to give them the authority to, I guess, control us and control our data. Do we really permit them to establish, I guess, ambiguous benchmarks, very similar to the Chinese social credit system, that describe whether or not our behavior is normal? Is that really up to these commercial partners to describe what normal is? In fact, is it up to anyone to describe what normal is? I thank you very much for attending this talk and for attending this event. There's heaps of literature I can recommend on the topic. I'll get a slide up with some books for those of you who are interested. For those of you who prefer popcorn and chill out nights and afternoons, there is an insights story that I wrote for the Melbourne Knowledge team as well that's gone online recently, in which I guess study a few series, shows and films that have actually started to warn us about social credit systems, and many of them actually date back quite a way in history. So I'll get my slide up with books. In the meantime, I saw that the Knowledge team has shared a few questions from the audience with me. Give me just a couple of seconds to go through these questions, and then I'm very happy to answer all of these questions. There's a question from Cynthia, on Facebook regarding the Chinese citizens that are banned from flights and trains, whether there is any data pertaining to their minority group. That data, as far as I'm aware, is not publicly available. Even though there is a lot of research, and I kind of want to put it between inverted commas here, the research on detecting membership of an ethnic minority. And I find it very concerning. What we all know, though, is that a lot of these new technologies and new techniques are very much in use in the Chinese province of Xinjiang, where it is indeed being used to control the Uyghur minority group there. But as far as the flights and trains data is concerned that I've been able to access online, no, there is no description of minority group membership there. There's also a question from Andy on Facebook, whether I can talk about Australia's new tracker app and how this may relate or not relate to the world of social credits. I think they're very different. Well, I know that they're very different systems. As I said before, I think we are very fortunate to live in a Western democracy where governments don't seem interested in establishing social credit system on a sort of national, countrywide level. I'm definitely not an expert, and I haven't unpacked the tracker app in a lot of detail, but I put a lot of confidence in that application personally. I use it as well, and I don't necessarily see how it could be used to develop a sort of social credit system. I think the only assumption that a lot of people make is that the tracker app is actually also being used to control how we move through public spaces, especially now moving forward. Whether we do indeed limit ourselves to the number of people that we can meet and see and can catch up with, sorry. But again, that sits very far apart from a social credit system. There's another question from Sylvie on Facebook, whether social credit systems exist anywhere apart from China. I'd probably have to answer that with yes and no. They do not exist in the same sense as China, in the sense that they are starting to become all-encompassing and very controlling and take into account multiple sorts of data sources. But as I said before, with some of the apps and some of the examples that I've highlighted, I think nothing here is as centralized as it is in China. But in a way, we've got our little tiny social credit systems on our phones in our individual apps that we use on a daily basis. So as far as I'm aware, China is definitely pushing and leading in that space, if you can say so. But there's currently nothing like that in the Western world. There's a very long question here from Cynthia on Facebook. And I'll just read it aloud verbatim. So many of my friends, Cynthia says, friends and family in China, they praise the state's vigilant monitoring and claim that it has promoted a more harmonious society. They choose personal safety and overall peace over data and privacy. Yes, this may be in part due to propaganda and ignorance, but would it be possible for Western countries to implement a system to reduce public disorder whilst maintaining our value for privacy? I think that's a fantastic question. It gives me a lot of inspiration to think that through in a lot more detail. I think it's a really, it's a fabulous question. It's got so many aspects, because there's sociological aspects, I think, that are needed to answer these questions. There's legal aspects. We have to look back at history as well. I think how Western and Asian Chinese culture specifically look at social values and behavior in society. Yeah, I think, look, one of the driving forces behind the Chinese social credit system from the literature seems to be that indeed it has been a country that has been plagued by malpractice in the political system for decades. And in that sense, the social credit system is, of course, very efficient, because when you do something wrong in government, when you do something wrong from an economical point of view, there is a numerical score that automatically flags that and flags you in the system as being someone who is untrustworthy to further deal with and further have any, business dealings with. I guess in the Western world, we have other systems to deal with it. There's a legal system that's fairly efficient, I would say. There's a system of fines, etc. And I think that's probably the main social and societal difference between the two groups. I personally don't think that a social credit system is a solution to solve the things that Cynthia talks about, which is around ensuring personal safety and overall peace. I think there are other attributes and other components and elements that can help us achieve and ensure these aspects. Another question from Gemma on Facebook. So Gemma just did the live scan on biometricmirror.com and asks me to explain how trustworthiness and weirdness are determined. It's a really good question, and I think it's a question that also ties back to my discussion about facial recognition systems. Very often these systems are developed with fairly small reference samples to all of a sudden come up with specific attributes for people, such as indeed trustworthiness and weirdness. Our system does exactly the same. We've trained our AI with nearly 2,000 photos of people that other people have looked at and rated on a scale from 1 to 10, enabling us to understand what the average trustworthy, what the average weird, aggressive, and all of the other attributes, what the average face really looks like. Now, initially that research was done not for the purpose of developing AI models and facial recognition models. Instead, that research was done to better understand how we memorize faces. Yet what we have done, simply for the purpose of our research to really flag these issues, is to develop an AI around it, so a facial recognition model. So what it does is it would have taken a photo of you, Gemma, and it would compare your face with the 2,000 faces that are in our database and for whom we have a good understanding of how trustworthy they look and how weird they look. And I stress how they look because that's indeed what we are doing. We're purely basing this on sort of visual comparison. We're not using any deep neurological insight or psychological insights. It's purely a visual comparison. Very similar to how we visually compare faces and visually, I guess, kind of make assumptions about people as we all walk down Swanston Street and all of a sudden someone walks up to us. We make this sort of snap judgments and snap calls on people. That's exactly the same thing that our system does. It really tells you how others would look at you and what others would think about your level of trustworthiness and your perceived level of weirdness. I do hope that you did look very trustworthy and not weird at all. Another question from Michael on Facebook as well, whether the march to a de facto social credit system here is inevitable or whether it can be slowed. I think it can be slow, but I think that's up to us as members of the public, as people that use, install and share social media applications without really thinking about what happens with the data, about what these systems do with us as an individual, how they feed our narcissistic tendencies, as I said before as well. And I'll repeat it again as well. I think we are very fortunate that we live in Western democracies, where I think the likelihood of all of a sudden these networks joining together and developing this single data platform that describes every single one of us in a great amount of detail, I think that's extremely unlikely to ever happen. But many other people have said things about things that were unlikely to happen. I do still think that we should remain vigilant. And I think vigilance means that we just become a lot more careful in how we rate each other, and that we really think carefully about the impact of rating and evaluating a person, a good, a product, or a service. The last question I have here in my list, but I'm definitely happy to answer more questions as well, is from Timothy on Facebook. So Timothy asks, where do I personally draw the line between software companies offering convenience versus ones that capture too much data? It's a great question. I feel like that's almost a talk in its own right. As I said a couple of times in my talk before as well, I'm a happy young father, and I think the amount of apps and technology that is being thrown at me to make my life as a young father, and also for my wife as a young mom, to make our lives easier, just that amount of apps and such, it's remarkable. So we've got what's it called? I think an intelligent baby monitor, which is a webcam that's really connected to Wi-Fi. There's even an AI built into it that detects and notifies us when our baby is crying or is awake or is stirring. In a way, that's kind of convenient for us because we don't have to have an old-fashioned baby monitor right next to us. But then at the same time, it has gone through my mind that that thing, which is in our baby's room, is capturing data. There is a video feed that's sent most likely overseas because it's manufactured by an overseas company. So in a way, there is too much data being captured about our child. There's too much data being captured as we enter our child's bedroom to suss him, to pick him up, to rock him to sleep and things like that. So that's a very long introduction, I guess, to my answer. But I think what I want to say, Timothy, is I totally agree. And I think I can understand where this question comes from. I think drawing the line between the convenience factor of technology and the data concerns, I think that becomes increasingly challenging. We all like convenience, right? We wouldn't be here today in front of our computers and laptops and on our phones looking at this very live stream and this very video if we didn't like the convenience of being able to do so. Imagine what our society would look like if there weren't these networks that offered convenience. So it's a hard one to answer. I think it's a challenge that I continually face. But with every app that I install, with every service, with every technology that I sign up for, I just go through a sort of quick mental checkup whether it's really worth it, and whether the convenience factor is definitely valuable for me. There's a question from Sam on Facebook as well. It's a follow-up question about how the biometric mirror works, whether we've probed the models we build to try and gain any interpretation of what features are being used for the various classification. Great question. And as I said before, we've developed this not so much to test the accuracy and I guess, the effectiveness of facial recognition models. What we've really developed it for is to start a public conversation about ethics of artificial intelligence and facial recognition. So no, we haven't probed these models to understand what features are being used, but we do, I guess, visually start to notice some sort of tendencies as well. As my colleague told in the video I showed as part of my talk as well, we see that men with beard seem to be classified as more aggressive. my colleague has a beard and he's definitely not aggressive. I can vouch for that. So there is this sort of, well, there are these features that we use to classify people, and that is indeed sometimes whether or not people have beards. Other attributes that might depend on gender identity of a person or skin color. And a lot of these, yeah, I guess social issues, we start to see them in the data, and we start to see also how biometric mirror simply reflects what we as a society thinks. And that's inherent to a lot of facial recognition models. As these models are developed by us, by humans, as they are developed by using training data that is sourced from the public, in a way, from public space, obviously the training data will simply incorporate the biases that we have as a society, and will simply amplify and reflect these biases moving forward as well. So it's absolutely a concern. Another final question, again from Scott on Facebook. And I think Scott is almost repeating what I just said in response to Sam's question. Scott asks whether the data added into systems come with bias, therefore the AI output isn't truly objective. I think Scott phrases my response to Sam's question in a much nicer way. Indeed, the AI output, or let me say the facial recognition output, is not necessarily truly objective, simply because it builds upon crowdsourced data, and crowdsourced data means that there is some form of bias in that. With that, I feel we have reached the end of this talk. I have no more questions thrown at me by the Melbourne Conversations team, Blair, which is you. So I thank you all again for joining us today on this talk. I personally enjoyed this talk very much. I hope you did too as well. And I'll, as we do these things, I'll check on Facebook and I'll check the conversations that continue to form as part of this talk, and I'm very happy to respond to any further questions. And I think the Melbourne Conversations team is keen to coordinate further questions via the email address as well. So thank you very much.